Justice. And I'd say that facetiously. I was honored to be invited. This hearing, a threat to justice everywhere, stemming the tide of hate crimes in America, will come to order. At the outset, I want to acknowledge the possible attempted assassination on former President Trump. I'm relieved that no one was hurt, and I thank the Secret Service and their law enforcement partners for keeping the former president safe. My staff was briefed by the Secret Service over the weekend, and we were asked them to keep us updated on the investigation. As we will discuss today, violence and threats of violence are always wrong, no matter the motive and no matter the target. I first held hearings on the growing threat of hate-motivated violence in 2011, again in 2012, after a white supremacist murdered 7 worshipers at the Sikh Gurdwara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Since I became chair of this committee, we've held several more hearings on the subject, including a hearing after the hostage crisis at the Colleyville, Texas synagogue, where we heard compelling testimony from Colleyville's Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker. The FBI's most recent national hate crime statistics document 11,634 hate crimes, the highest number since the FBI began reporting data. And since the horrific October 7th Hamas attack on Israel, we have seen an increase in attacks on Jewish Americans, Palestinian Americans, Arab Americans, and Muslim Americans. I would like to play a video now to highlight 2 especially horrific incidents.
Today marks 5 years since the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in U.S. history. A community also now confronting the assault on Jews in Israel.
I still can't believe it. It's just still so raw.
When Hamas launched its deadly terror attack in Israel, for Lee, the pain from 5 years ago came flooding back.
Very activating and very difficult.
Wadia Al-Fayoumi was stabbed to death by his mother's landlord on Saturday morning in Plainfield. The boy's mother was also stabbed, but she survived.
Prosecutors say the family's 71-year-old landlord, Joseph Zuba, attacked her over the conflict in Israel and believed his tenants were going to call over their Palestinian friends to harm them.
I need justice. How can you live without justice? And how you will be in peace without justice?
This as tensions are high across the country, with protests on both sides since the conflict began, as the FBI warns of mounting threats against Muslim and Jewish people nationwide.
Pray for peace. We need many prayers for peace.
I'd like to acknowledge that my constituent, Hanan Shaheen Wadia Al-Fayoumi, mother, is in the audience. I was honored to join my colleagues, Senator Tammy Duckworth and Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, introducing a resolution honoring Wadia. Mrs. Shaheen, I'm so sorry for your devastating loss. We are also joined by Alan Mellinger, his wife Lauren, and their daughter Amy Rose Mellinger. Alan's mother and Amy's grandmother was one of the 11 congregants murdered at the Tree of Life synagogue, the deadliest attack on Jews in American history. I thank these survivors personally and their families and friends for joining us this morning. Since 2000, according to federal law enforcement, white supremacists have been responsible for more homicides than any other domestic extremist group. White supremacists have been more responsible than any other domestic extremist group. And just this month, the Justice Department arrested and indicted the leaders of the Terrorgram Collective, a white supremacist terrorist group that allegedly solicited attacks against minority communities and the assassination of U.S. public officials, including a Jewish senator. Free speech is sacred in America, but public officials on both sides of the aisles have a responsibility not to fan the flames of hatred. The former president and his vice presidential candidate have both spread the lie that Haitians in Springfield, Ohio are eating cats and dogs. Everyone in public life should condemn anti-Semitic and racist language and disassociate themselves from demagogues who traffic in it. This type of rhetoric can have deadly consequences. In recent days, there have been numerous bomb and shooting threats in Springfield, Ohio, and schools and other institutions have been forced to close. And look at the Tree of Life synagogue shooting. On social media, the shooter claimed that Jewish Americans were conspiring to destroy the white race by encouraging non-white immigrants to invade our country. This anti-Semitic and racist Great Replacement conspiracy theory was also cited by the white supremacists who murdered 10 black Americans at the Tops Market in Buffalo in 2022. In recent years, it has been echoed by former president and other political figures. Political leaders, both Democrats and Republicans, must condemn hate wherever and whenever it is spewed and avoid rhetoric that could incite violence, because hate is inconsistent with who we are as Americans and the diversity that has always strengthened our nation. With that, I'll turn to the ranking member, Senator Graham, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number one, as to the recent apparent attempt on President Trump's life, I do want to thank the Secret Service agents on the ground for acting quickly, and it did not work. You can't have a man camped out by the golf course for 12 hours with an AK-47 and scope on it and say the system worked. We're just very fortunate he stuck the barrel through the fence before the president got to the golf hole in question. I want to applaud the Secret Service agent who saw the barrel, but this could have been a completely different story if the man had just waited, saw President Trump, then acted. The system is just broken. I don't know if it's resources. I asked the acting director before. He said they're fine. I don't buy that. Agents tell me they're working tremendous hours. I'd like to have more agents, not less. I'd like to get the Secret Service back into Treasury where they were more focused. But we'll talk about that another day. I'm just glad we didn't have a worse outcome, but I think the system is broken. As to our hearing today, on May the 2nd, 2024, all Republicans wrote a letter to Chairman Durbin. We implore you to promptly hold a Judiciary Committee hearing to confront the flagrant civil rights violations targeting Jewish students on college campuses across America and to expose the radical Islamic ideology infiltrating our universities. The goal was to have a hearing about why it's so hard to go to school if you're Jewish. And it's really hard to go to these schools if you're Jewish. You're being knocked down, you're being spat on. It is just completely out of control. This is not the hearing we're getting, so we'll work with what we've got. The House has had 10 hearings focused on anti-Semitism, on the rise like it was in the 30s, in my view. We're not talking about fringe elements within any one group or crazy people. They exist throughout society. What happened to the 6-year-old is just horrible. The man will get whatever comes his way, and to me, it's not enough. I'm trying to focus on a systematic problem. America has a systematic problem on college campuses. It is being funded, the DNI says, not by Qatar, but by Iran. So we have to deal with this. This committee should act not just in general, but specifically about what it's like to be Jewish in America in 2024. And it is not a good story. So I want to introduce into the record the original request, if I may, and also introduce into the record a letter I've got from the Union of Jewish Congregation of Americans. If I may introduce both letters, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Okay. Now, the problem is really unnerving. 2.4% of Americans are Jewish. 60% of all religious-based hate crimes have been directed against the Jewish people. There's something going on here that needs to be addressed and better dealt with, and people in charge of these universities need to be held more accountable. As to what I'm trying to do, I've been working since last April with the Biden administration to find a way to normalize between Saudi Arabia and the State of Israel. Answer to many problems that we face, Israel faces, and I'm a strong advocate for ending the Arab-Israeli conflict. And a beneficiary of that would be a Palestinian community better treated, not run by terrorists, with a more hopeful life and a secure Israel. Count me in for trying to end conflict. Count me in for trying to reconcile the Arab and Jewish communities in the Middle East and anywhere else. That's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about a rise throughout the world, but particularly here, against the Jewish people. Examples of what you face: Columbia University and FATA, Stanford University, somebody wearing a Hamas headband, Princeton University, the Hamas material, Union Station, July the 24th. Hamas is coming. This is all over the country right now. And let me just say this. Hamas is a homicidal terrorist group dedicated not to uplifting the Palestinian people, but destroying the state of Israel. So when you write Hamas, you're either one of two things: blatantly anti-Semitic or dumb as a rock. I'll let you pick. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Everybody should condemn Hamas, not use their name routinely and hold up their cause throughout college campuses on America. So what I hope we can get started in this country is a conversation about what should be the result of attending a school and being picked upon simply because of your religion, in this case, being Jewish. The next one. One of our witnesses says calling for the genocide of the state of Israel should not get you disciplined. It should. It should. You know, when David Duke was on colleges' campuses in his time handing out Nazi stuff, he should have been disciplined. I disagree with that. I believe in free speech, but I don't believe advocating for the killing of an entire class of people. That's not free speech. So what we have before us today as a nation is a moment of choosing. We can choose to ignore this, lump it in with every other problem we got in the country, or we can focus on it. I prefer to focus on it. I prefer to let the American Jewish community know enough is enough. We're going to be there for you. We're going to have your back. And we're not rising to the occasion. I would urge my friends on the other side, let's have a hearing focused on this problem, not lumping this problem in with every other problem we have. This is unique to the time in which we live. It is getting out of control. As to rhetoric, yeah, we can all do better. I get that. But this idea that one group is going to destroy America, or one person is going to destroy America, needs to come to an end. Nobody's going to destroy America. The Iranians would, if they could. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope we can follow up with another hearing focused on our original request, which is combating anti-Semitism on college campuses, making it really difficult if you're a Jewish parent to send your kid to college.
Senator Graham, you and I agree on more than we disagree. And we certainly agree that hate crimes should be treated seriously, whatever their origin, whatever their purpose. They are unacceptable in this nation of ours. Prioritizing which group is being discriminated against the worst, I don't believe is a valid exercise of our authority here. What we are trying to do is to identify a problem in America that extends beyond Jewish population to the Arab population to the Palestinian population. All of those hate crimes are unacceptable. All of them are unacceptable. The letter which you asked me to enter into the record calls on us to pass a bill that I know of quite well, the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. That bill passed the House of Representatives. It was called by Senator Schumer in the Senate. It's a bill that I sponsored. It was stopped on the floor and filibustered by the Republican side. I don't want to draw a conclusion about their views on hatred and violence, but I think we all ought to acknowledge the fact that work needs to be done and we shouldn't tie ourselves in knots, but should work toward ending hate crimes in America. At this point, we're going to turn to the witnesses who appear before us. I'll introduce the majority witnesses. The ranking member will introduce the minority witness. Our first witness is Maya Berra, co-chair of the Hate Crimes Task Force at the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. She is also the executive director of the Arab American Institute. We are also joined by Ken Stern, director of the Bard Center for the Study of Hate. Mr. Stern previously served as director of the Division of Anti-Semitism and Extremism at the American Jewish Committee, where he worked for 25 years. Ranking member Graham, would you like to introduce your witness?
Mr. Chairman, our witness is Rabbi Mark Goldfeder. He is CEO and director of the National Jewish Advocacy Center, who was appointed in 2021 to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum Council. He handles cases involving anti-Semitism in its many manifestations and has worked with local, state, federal legislatures on measures to support the Jewish community. He is also an attorney. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Graham. After I swear in the witnesses, each one will have 5 minutes to provide an opening statement. There will be rounds of questions. Each senator will have 5 minutes, and please try to remain within your time. So would each of the witnesses please stand to be sworn in? Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Ms. Berry, you may proceed with your opening statement. Make sure your microphone is on.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, and distinguished members of this committee. Thank you for convening this hearing today to address the crisis of hate crime in our country. I want to begin by offering my condolences and support to Wadia on the tragic loss of her son. I also want to acknowledge the members of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh who are also here and extend my condolences and the support to them as well. I'm truly sorry for your immeasurable loss, and the commitment that we make to continue to focus on hate is rooted in the need to address the crisis your families in pain have endured. Understanding the nature of hate crime data, I would suggest this room includes other victims of hate crimes, some who have reported it, others who have not, some where the assailant was charged with a hate crime, and others where they were not. In all cases, it was an assault or a murder, arson or vandalism, or a threat to commit such a crime, and the motivation for committing the crime was based on individual's action or perceived personal characteristics of the victim's identity. In all cases, it was a crime where the immediate victim was harmed, as well as others who may be like them, their community. Hate crimes instill fear in communities, and because the safety of us all is linked, because we are on a very basic level all in one community with one another, hate crimes impact our entire country. As we attempt to address this hate crime crisis we are in, we are well served remembering that. Why do I say a hate crime crisis? Because our government's official hate crime statistics provide the data confirming this crisis. From 2015 to 2022, we have seen a 99% increase in hate crime. 99% increase. From just under 6,000 reported hate crimes in 2015 to 11,643 in 2022. The FBI's 2023 data has not been released yet, but based on the state data AI has pulled in preparation for this hearing, it is likely we will see yet another consecutive year increase. Every single year since the 2016 presidential election, the trajectory has been a dangerous increase of hate crimes in our country. Anti-Black or African-American hate crimes continue to be a plurality of all hate crimes reported. There were 3,424 in 2022. Anti-Asian or Pacific Islander hate crime saw a major spike in hate, the most acute stages during the COVID-19 pandemic and its surrounding discourse by some elected officials. Anti-Muslim hate crimes were nearly 5% of all reported hate crimes during the 2016 presidential election and the discussions of a Muslim ban. The only year with a higher record was 2001 in the post-9/11 backlash. Anti-Hispanic and Latino hate crimes have shown a persistent increase with a record-breaking 738 hate crimes in 2022. The annual number of reported hate crimes targeting the Latino community has increased in the last 7 years on a manner that has outpaced the overall increase of all reported hate. And while we've seen an increase, all of this, while we've seen an increase in anti-immigrant rhetoric and xenophobia, particularly being experienced right now by the Haitian American community. LGBTQ and hate crime almost doubled from 2015 to 2022, with 1,925 on record in 2022. And while the annual number of hate crimes based on sexual orientation now represents a smaller share of all hate crimes reported each year, that is not the case with gender identity hate crimes, which have increased 4% of all reported in 2022. With regard to Arab Americans and Jewish Americans, we took a deep dive into the data after October 7th by examining available state-level data from 27 states in the District of Columbia. And with all the necessary caveats about state-level versus federal data, here too, the data confirms what we know. Anti-Arab has increased from 104 in 2022 to 180 in 2023. Anti-Jewish from 1,311 to 2,073. Further, isolating our October-December for the 21 states in D.C. where we could do that, it shows about half of all of the incidents reported in 2023 occurred in the last 3 months, October, November, and December. That's a 54% increase for Arab Americans. 54 and 49 for Jewish Americans. Wadia al-Fayoumi's murder in his home in Illinois, the attempted murder of Hisham al-Wartni, Kenan Abdul-Hamid, and Tahsin al-Hamid in Vermont, while 3 college students were out for a walk, wearing their keffiyehs and speaking occasionally in Arabic, is another example, as is the unnamed 25-year-old Brooklyn man attacked with a baseball bat after being defamed. The backlash effect is real for both communities, and the historic levels of hate crimes we're experiencing harm individuals, communities, and our country. We can and must respond more effectively. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Rabbi Goldfeder. Would you make sure your microphone is on? Thank you.
Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Mark Goldfeder. I'm director of the National Jewish Advocacy Center, a nonprofit legal organization that combats anti-Semitism in all of its forms. It is an honor to appear before you to address this important topic, and I also can extend my condolences to the families of the victims. May God comfort you. Senators, it is no secret that anti-Semitism has skyrocketed since Hamas's brutal October 7th massacre. On college campuses across the country, between hiding from mobs in libraries, avoiding dining halls because of death threats, and removing Nazi symbols from Chabad houses, Jewish students have been subjected to campaigns that employ classic anti-Semitic tropes and calls for them to be removed from campus if they dare identify as Zionists, which the vast majority of Jews do. In 2023, anti-Semitic assault incidents increased by 45%, vandalism by 69%, and anti-Semitic harassment increased by 184%. Those aren't speech incidents. Those are hate crimes. Let me be clear. Hate speech, no matter how offensive, is protected by the First Amendment. But assault and battery, arson, trespassing, vandalism, breaking and entering, destruction of property, harassment, and true threats are all examples of unlawful anti-Semitic behavior and hate crimes that have happened in the last few months and that can and should be regulated. Which brings me to the next point. In hearing about hate crimes, why am I focusing specifically on anti-Jewish hate crimes? 3 reasons. First, there's an acute problem taking place right now before our very eyes. The majority of religiously motivated hate crimes are committed against Jewish people, and the numbers are getting worse. We need to deal with that reality now before more people get hurt. Second, it's not about Jewish exceptionalism, it's about equality. There's an equal protection problem here, and it's definitional, and it can be fixed. Third, it's important to address anti-Semitism in the context of the broader hate crimes conversation, because what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. It did not take very long for the chance to morph from death to Israel to death to America, and from spray painting Hillel houses and desecrating menorahs to disrupting pride marches, defacing George Washington's statue, and vandalizing the Freedom Bell. Stopping anti-Semitic hate crimes is a matter of self-preservation for all Americans, because even if you aren't Jewish, they are coming for you next. Just ask them, they aren't shy. And so I'd like to talk about solutions. Here are 3 practical steps to stem the tide of unlawful hate directed against Jewish Americans to the benefit of all Americans. First, please use your oversight powers to ensure that our laws are enforced as written. This includes, of course, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, but also laws like the Immigration and Nationality Act that deal with foreign students providing support to terrorist organizations. Student groups are openly working as agents of Hamas. They are handing out recruitment flyers on our campuses on a daily basis. My organization, NJAC, has brought 5 anti-terrorist act suits since October 7th to go after some of these bad actors, but we should not have to do that. Second, Congress should clarify or ask the DOJ to clarify what should be obvious. The First Amendment is not a free pass to threaten, harass, intimidate, or otherwise violate the rights of others. And finally, because Jewish identity is so multifaceted, without a standard definition for authorities to reference when they're analyzing the intent behind illegal, discriminatory actions, not speech, it is too easy for anti-Semites to hide behind this ambiguity and commit unlawful acts against Jews with impunity. The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act solves this problem by requiring the relevant authorities to consider, as contextual, rebuttable evidence, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, definition of anti-Semitism. And no, the act does not curb speech, and it's not a he said, she said debate. You can go ahead and read the operative language yourself. Title VI violations, by definition, do not include speech. The definition also contains appropriate safeguards that take into account the importance of nuance and context in situations that involve allegations of discriminatory intent. For example, the explicit caveat that all of the examples given are not dispositive, but could, taking into account the overall context, be evidence of anti-Semitism. There are very few things that the Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations have agreed on, but the IHRA definition is one of them, not to mention a supermajority of U.S. states that have embraced it and the vast majority of Jewish people across every ideological spectrum. Of course, Jews are not monolithic, and there is a small minority within the Jewish community that does not support it, but they do not represent the Jewish community, which has spoken in a loud and clear voice. Every major Jewish organization in this country, by estimates of membership, over 90% of American Jews support this bill wholeheartedly. That is more than a consensus, senators. That is a mandate. Nor is the bill merely symbolic. Of course, our current laws should capture anti-Semitism, but in practice, they don't. I'm general counsel to 24 Hillels in the state of Georgia. In one instance last October, a group of students surrounded a Jewish peer, threw him to the ground, said, "We're going to kill you, your family, and all Israelis." The boy's not Israeli, just Jewish. Police decided it was not a hate crime because he said Israel, not Jew. I'll conclude by pointing out the obvious. Protecting Jewish people does not come at the expense of any other group. You can be vigorously pro-Palestinian without being anti-Semitic. You can even be virulently anti-Semitic without committing unlawful actions. But all too often, that is not what is happening. I stand ready to work with the committee and any member on this important matter and welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Mr. Stern?
Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Graham, and the other honorable members of the committee. My name is Kenneth Stern. I direct the Bard Center for the Study of Hate, and I also worked at the American Jewish Committee for 25 years, where I directed the Division on Anti-Semitism and Extremism. I want to share a framework to think about anti-Semitism and hate crime in the campus and democracy. When people hate, whether they hate people of another race, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, or politics, they crave simplicity and certainty. They are seduced by binary good-bad thinking and drawn to symbols. This is a human characteristic rooted in how we divide the world into us and them. And people who want to combat hate, we're human too, and not immune from the seductive illusion and comfort of simple answers to complicated questions. Anti-Semitism is at heart conspiracy theory that sees Jews as conspiring to harm humanity. It's offered as an explanation for what goes wrong in the world. It appears on the right and on the left. It's also the philosophical backbone of much white supremacy. But we tend to think about anti-Semitism as only what people say about Jews or Israel, and not enough about how vilification of anyone among us can create a conveyor belt to anti-Semitism. As Senator Durbin mentioned, Alan Lauren and Amy Mallinger are in the audience today. Rose Mallinger, Alan's mother, Lauren's mother-in-law, Amy's grandmother, was murdered at the Tree of Life Synagogue. That shooting was clearly an act of anti-Semitism. But the background noise to the Tree of Life massacre was fear of immigrants. The synagogue was targeted because it had participated in a program supporting them. But you won't find sitting here today the relatives of the 23 people killed when Mexicans and Mexican Americans were targeted at the Walmart in El Paso. No one would call that an act of anti-Semitism. But the two shooters had nearly identical ideologies. They just chose different targets. To fight anti-Semitism and any form of hate requires a wide lens to understand these movements and what draws people to them, not simple filters that may be comforting. Strong democratic institutions, including the protection of free speech, are also important. That doesn't mean ignore hateful speech. It means we don't use levers of the state to chill or suppress speech we don't like, creating free speech martyrs in the process. There have been anti-Semitic attacks on campus, and of course, as we know, hate directed at Palestinian, Arab, and Muslims too. But there's a distinction being lost in much of this debate. No student should be the victim of bullying, harassment, intimidation, true threats, or discrimination. But there's an unfortunate expectation that students should be protected from hearing things that cut them to their core. A university must be a place where students expect to be physically safe, not intellectually safe, where they are helped to ponder why that otherwise friendly student has views seen as ignorant at best, evil at worst. The questions we should be asking are, how do we improve the campus to encourage the intellectual imagination and emotional empathy? How do we use the tools from the academy to break down the us versus them problems outside the campus too? There's an elephant in the room, the IRA definition, and I'm happy to discuss why I believe codifying it will harm the fight against anti-Semitism. But let me conclude with things that I believe will help reduce anti-Semitism and other forms of hate. First, increase academic focus both in teaching and research on human hate and what to do about it. There are a number of hate studies centers, but there should be more. 2, provide more funding to OCR and for the National Strategy on Anti-Semitism. 3, we need better data on hate crimes. 4, we also need data on the cost of hate crimes. Hate crimes don't only have a moral cost, they don't only traumatize families and communities, they cost each of us a veritable hate tax. My Bard colleague Mike Martell created an economic template to estimate the cost of hate crime, using the 2012 murder at the Sikh Temple in Wisconsin as a case study. And we're working with lay people from the ADL in Phoenix to approximate the cost of hate crime there. Why isn't the government computing this cost? And finally, the other day I was explaining a project we're developing with Boston University to help victims of hate crime find support, whether it be how to report a hate crime or counseling or other resources, using AI and social media to help them. We're in discussions with the Eradicate Hate Global Summit to see if they can incorporate some aspects of the plan into their work. The person asked, why isn't Congress figuring out creative ways to help more victims of hate crime instead of you? It's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you all for your testimony, and I'm sure there's some questions coming from my colleagues here. I guess one of the fundamental threshold questions is whether we can segregate, I hate to use that word, whether we can separate one type of hate crime and say, this is the worst, this is the priority, to the exclusion of the others, we're only going to deal with one. Ms. Berry?
Thank you, Senator. My position is I think not. We've worked collectively as a community to understand the nature of these hate crimes. As you said in your opening remarks, we have the highest number ever reported since the FBI started collecting the data in 1991. And the response has to be one that acknowledges all targeted communities are being impacted. So our response has to be one that acknowledges that and as a result understands that singling out any one community doesn't actually get us all safer. I certainly agree that different communities are targeted at different times and perhaps for different reasons. But the underlying issue is one of hate and a crime, and we must respond accordingly.
Rabbi, do you believe that language being used by politicians that dehumanize certain groups adds to this atmosphere of hate crime?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I think that all extreme political rhetoric is dangerous. Just look at the 2 recent attempts on President Trump's life, and I think that both sides should absolutely do their best to tone it down.
And do you believe that as politicians, if we set out to dehumanize groups like immigrants, does that have an impact on the conversation about hate crimes?
Thank you, Senator. I think no group should ever be dehumanized, period.
I couldn't agree with you more. Mr. Stern, you give the example of the El Paso Walmart and the Pittsburgh synagogue and believe that though the targets were different, the motivation was the same. Explain that.
Well, and you had mentioned, Senator Durbin, the Buffalo shooting, too. If you look at the ideologies of the 3 shooters, they were a combination of seeing hating immigrants, seeing people of color as a threat, and believing, as my colleague Eric Ward articulated very well in an article called Skin in the Game, that white supremacy, the backbone of it, is anti-Semitism. So you can't really separate them all as saying, well, this is a problem only in one sense, this is a problem in another sense. They feed on each other. And I agree with the rabbi that anti-Semitism is a threat to democracy, a miner's canary, and so forth. But the flip side is also true, that vilifying anyone among us is a conveyor belt to anti-Semitism. It helps people see the world as, why are we losing? Why were people at Charlottesville talking Jews will not replace us? It's because they saw that they were losing a place in society, they felt, and they thought the Jews were behind it. Again, anti-Semitism is Jews conspiring to harm humanity and giving an explanation for what goes wrong in the world. So that's how I see these things as related.
Ms. Berry, how do you draw the line in conversation in a free society like America when it comes to how far you can go? Can I disagree with Bibi Netanyahu and still stand up for Israel?
That's entirely up to you, Senator, and I think the answer would certainly be yes. The issue is not the matter of speech in terms of it's objectionable or not, but why are you targeting an individual? And are you committing a crime in the process of targeting that individual? If you're targeting a person because of a protected category, that's a hate crime. And the importance of the point you're making about dehumanization and speech, I think is absolutely critical. Because, for example, I might say something, but that's entirely different than you would, Senator, as the chair of the Judiciary Committee saying something. Your standing in our society is such that you hold a certain importance as an elected official. And when our elected officials are engaging in dialogue, again, not about policy disagreements, because you can have policy disagreements. It's when you target specific communities as the source of those problems. That's where we find ourselves in the place that we are, which is that we see spikes in hate against specific communities after comments are made or communities are targeted. We saw it during the pandemic. We see it now when we talk about immigrants the way that we do. We certainly see it across the board. I want to remind us again that anti-Black racism as an issue is the reason we continue to have a plurality of all hate crimes targeting the Black community. And the final point I would make is that since the hate crime data was collected, the anti-Jewish category in religion has always been the top category. There is undoubtedly a problem of anti-Semitism in this country. That goes without saying, and the data has verified that. It's what are we doing to respond to it in a whole of society approach that is correctly focused on the actual problem.
Thank you very much. Senator Graham.
To each witness, start with you, Ms. Berry. Do you believe it's very difficult now for Jewish students to attend colleges in America?
I think it can be for individual Jewish students.
No, I said, is it?
It can't. It depends on the individual students and what they're encountering, yes.
Rabbi, do you think it is?
Yes, almost impossible.
Ms. Stern.
Senator, it depends on the campus. For many, absolutely so. But I would also add one other thing, that there are some Jewish students who are anti-Zionists, and Judaism leads them to that position, and they are also getting
Mr. I'm trying to establish a baseline. The reason we wrote the letter is because we see playing out before our eyes just an assault on Jewish students in colleges. I'm looking at systems here. Does anybody, let me ask you, the DNI said Iran, we have observed actors tied to Iran's government posing as activists online, seeking to encourage protest and even providing financial support to protesters. Does anybody doubt that? Okay. Mr. Stern, is it Hamas's goal to destroy the Jewish state?
Absolutely.
Is it Hezbollah's goal to destroy the Jewish state?
Absolutely.
Is it Iran's goal to destroy the Jewish state?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Berry, do you agree with that?
I think these are complicated questions. I
No,
really don't want to talk
there's nothing
about
complicated
policy.
about it. That's the most ridiculous
Senator,
testimony ever given in this committee.
Yeah. So
if you think it's
all of those-
complicated to figure out that Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran wants to kill all the Jews, I should not listen to anything else you got to say.
Okay. May I,
and
Senator,
I won't.
if I may,
Rabbi,
Senator?
Rabbi,
I think we started.
Do you believe that Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran are out to kill all the Jews and destroy Israel?
I believe they're out to destroy the Jewish state and kill all the Jews.
Okay, so I do too. And I believe Iran's behind this. And what I would like this committee to do is deal with the systematic problems that exist regarding what's going on American colleges today. What's going on in colleges today, there's an organized effort to intimidate, harass, and physically assault Jewish students. What's going on today is an effort on multiple fronts to wipe Israel off the map.
This is not an academic discussion. As to what should happen, Mr. Stern, if a student on a college campus uses the N-word against African American or students, should they be expelled?
I think if a student goes and harasses another student, says that to their face, that could be absolutely a matter for discipline. However, I think if they're just standing up there with a sign or saying, this is what I think, or a word I'm choosing, and not threatening somebody and not harassing, then that should be deplored, but it should not be the subject of discipline.
But do you agree with me if African American students are being called the N-word and harassed and belittled by other students, those students should pay a price for that?
I think if there's any type of harassment, it doesn't matter the word. But if the students are being
the word
harassed,
does matter if you're African American.
Well, what I'm saying is that no harassment should be tolerated.
Well, right, there you go. That's good. So the idea that you could hold somebody accountable for using words makes sense to me, because free speech is a concept that we all hold near and dear, but words start wars. Words can incite violence. You can't yell fire in a theater. So what I would say that's going on here is that we have to deal with the problem at its roots, first identifying it. America has many problems. There are people hateful to each other. That's been with us since there's been a country. We live in a unique moment in America, I think. Now, I'm trying to get us to focus on that moment about not only a rise of anti-Semitism, but an effort by agents of Iran and other powers to divide us here at home. What's so sad is that October the 7th was designed to destroy the reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Israel. All the intel shows us that Iran struck Israel in such a vicious way to stop the reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Israel. I believe that with all my heart. I don't want them to win. I want to normalize between Saudi Arabia and Israel. I want a better life for the Palestinian community, and it can never happen without Hamas being destroyed and never coming back. It can never happen without Hezbollah and Iran being contained. It can never happen without security for the state of Israel. So what I would say, without any hesitation, that what's going on in America on our campuses is worthy of a discussion all of its own. We need to get to the bottom of it and start holding people accountable who run these schools. Thank you.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Let me start by agreeing with Senator Graham that the peace framework that is being developed in the Middle East would be the very best outcome both for Israel and for the Palestinian people, and that there are deliberate efforts out there to try to interfere with the conclusion of that peace framework. And we're simply going to need to fight our way through those to achieve that goal. I would also concur with his statement that there are people hateful to each other in this country. But, Ms. Berry, I'd like to ask you, in addition to people hateful to each other in this country, is there also strategically deployed misinformation and disinformation designed to accelerate and foment that hatefulness? And could you talk a little bit about that behind the scenes or backstage effort to make the hatefulness of some people worse and draw others into it?
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. You're absolutely right. And I regret that Senator Graham has left the room, because what I would have added was that the point he's making about foreign actors attempting to sow division in our country is quite real. Certainly Iran was that. We saw a lot of it happening during the 2020 election as well, where a particular line of potential division would then be inundated on the various social media platforms with fake disinformation, misinformation, targeting those communities, just literally to spread the hatred. So an individual may or may not have taken that position at all, but rather all of a sudden I'm inundated with these memes that are reinforcing this small potential idea I had, and I'm running with it.
And our
it's highly
intelligence
problematic.
services have pointed also to Russia as an agent of disinformation and misinformation intended to interfere with and disrupt our elections to the point where the Department of Justice has announced criminal allegations. So what would your recommendations be for going directly at that problem of strategic and particularly foreign misinformation and disinformation designed to damage our democracy using hate as its tool of destruction?
The good news is that the Department of Justice, I think, is taking this very seriously and has. The challenge for us is that we continue to be in this space with the social media platforms not, frankly, responding adequately to the spread of hate on their sites. So until we have a better sense of how we can address that, one would argue actually that Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter, has now taken us to a place where it's gotten considerably worse, where even the other social media platforms, for example, who had complete programs in place to address the 2020 election, have not prepared those same programs to protect us from disinformation because I think the landscape has changed dramatically.
Would it be helpful to better understand the financing of these groups and to have better resources to trace back from the domestic attack on our democracy using hatred back to the foreign interests that finance this, likely through multiple intermediary shell organizations to try to obscure their hand in that glove?
I think that's exactly why the Department of Justice is such a critical player in this space. They need to address this. It's different than maligned actors who kind of put this information out. There's clearly an agenda in play here. And I would suggest part of the, excuse me, Senator, for this point, but part of the reason it was difficult to address the first question sort of correctly is what I was trying to say is that we have state actors that are attempting to influence our democracy in a very harmful way. To suggest that a national movement and a national organic student movement that's come together to support Palestinian human rights is the same thing is really highly problematic. And the final point, if I may, I would make on what I was saying was the part that's complicated.
My time's about to run out, so let me just make my last point, which is that they call these covert operations for a reason. And I think we'd all be better off if there were much more visibility into the financial links behind these front groups that propagate this kind of poison so that press, public, not just the technical money laundering experts of the Department of Justice, but more spotlights of American democracy can be put on these schemes. Thanks very much. My time has expired.
Thank you.
Grassley?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, before I ask questions, I have two articles. One highlights actors with ties to Iran attempting to influence and finance anti-Israel protests in our country. This other article mentions that Russia is also trying to exploit divisions over the Israel-Hamas conflict. Rabbi?
Without objection, they'll be entered in the record. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are some of the higher education institutions, either wittingly or unwittingly, shielding or even fostering anti-Semitism in the United States today? Rabbi?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. Yes, I'll point you to a study done by the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, which found that at least 100 American colleges and universities illegally withheld information on approximately $13 billion in undocumented contributions from foreign governments, many of which are authoritarian. The study found higher levels of anti-Semitic incidents reported on those campuses. From 2015 to 2020, institutions that accepted money from Middle Eastern donors had, on average, 300% more anti-Semitic incidents on campus than institutions that did not. And campus-level anti-Semitic incidents, by the way, forward predict county-level anti-Semitic incidents, including hate crimes.
Further question, Rabbi. Have the Department of Justice and Department of Education in this administration done enough to address epidemic of hate speech and anti-Semitism on the college campuses? And if the answer is yes or no, what more should the administration do from your opinion?
Unfortunately, they have done nowhere near enough. They should enforce the laws as written, including Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. If the words of Title VI mean anything, it talks about behavior that is severe and pervasive enough that it interferes with the person's education. They have to mean something that has to include what's happening to Jewish students on campus right now. And we have seen 0 universities lose their funding, even as these encampments literally force Jews out of parts of the school. So no, they have not done more. And they should also enforce laws like the Nationality Act, which prohibit foreign students from providing material support to terrorism.
Yeah. You gave some evidence about the amount of money being spent by terrorist groups, but what have you discovered about Hamas's potential funding of college protests, and what evidence have you relied on to form your opinion?
Well, it actually goes beyond funding, Senator. Going back to the Supreme Court case in Holder versus Humanitarian Law in 2010, it's not just money that counts, it's services as well. And unfortunately, these student groups on campus are literally acting as the PR agents of Hamas. Some countries spend up to $200 million a year on PR firms. Hamas can't because they're an FTO. But immediately after October 7th, some of these groups, like the National Students for Justice in Palestine, came out and said, we are not just in solidarity with this movement, we are part of this movement. They chanted, we are Hamas. And when a group tells you that they are trying to provide material support to terrorists, you should believe them. And so it's not just an exchange of money, it's a coordination with Hamas that is a terrible problem.
In the same vein as my question just asked, there have been media reports citing Iran, Russia, and other international actors as taking advantage and stoking civil rights unrest here. What do you think, Rabbi, what do you think can be done to counter this malignant influence?
I think in general, Senator, we need better tracking of the kind of donations that are coming from overseas, whether it's to 501c3s that are in theory acting as charities, but are actually, as in the case of the Palestine Chronicle, for example, literally paying money to a terrorist that was holding 4 hostages in his house. 3 hostages in his house. I think that it would behoove the United States government to remove the tax status of any charity that provides material support to terrorists.
Yeah. And I think you've talked around this next question I have, but I'd like to ask it more directly, Rabbi. What has allowed for the recent rise of anti-Semitism and hate in our communities?
Senator, that's a very hard question to answer. It is really difficult to talk about why anti-Semitism persists. It's the kind of thing that is a mutating virus. Different parts of society hate Jews for being whatever they don't like. So Jews are at the same time too strong and too weak. They're parasitic and overpowering. They are superhuman, like in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, or they're subhuman, like in Nazi ideology. It's what has led to the problem and the infestation of anti-Semitism is the fact that we don't have clear definitions that authorities can use to rely on when they're trying to assess the intent behind anti-Semitic crime. So, for example, everyone here knows that if you attack a Chinese person because you think they have unfair trade policies, that is ethnic or national origin discrimination. If you attack a Russian person because you think Russia should not have invaded Ukraine, that is national origin or ethnic discrimination. But if you attack a Jewish person because you hate Israel, for some reason there's some confusion. We need clear definitions, and that will do the job.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator Grassley. Thank you to our witnesses and to the chair and ranking member for holding this important hearing. I'm a former prosecutor, enforced some of our state hate crimes laws, put in Andy Lugar, our U.S. attorney, who has been enforced those laws on the federal level as well. And I think that's a big piece of this. Another piece of this coming from a state that has a large Jewish population, the country's largest Somali population, second largest Hmong population, and one of the largest Ethiopian populations. I believe that we also have to do everything we can on the local level to stand above the hate that we're seeing on the internet and the hate that we're seeing across the world right now. And I always remember the story of when a threat was made, a serious threat on our Jewish community center, and all the kids had to run out in their swimming suits in the middle of the winter of the center. When they got back to the center, the first call message for them was from the neighboring Islamic center that offered them a place to go if they could not return to their own community center. So I think a lot of this is going to be on all of us to stand above this, and I appreciate it very much, the discussion today. I guess I'd start, Ms. Berry. We have, I know in our state, just last year, as many as 25 Jewish schools and religious facilities received bomb threats. We had a serious case of white supremacist bombing an Islamic center in Bloomington, Minnesota, that was investigated and, in fact, prosecuted on the federal level. We have seen on the national level, all this has been discussed, 388% rise in anti-Semitic incidences since this time last year, and 216% increase in requests for help and reported bias against Muslims since October 7th. Your testimony goes into recent data on hate crimes. Can you talk more about the threats that we have seen since October 7th, and also if there's an actual underreporting of this, that the numbers might even be worse than what we're hearing?
Thank you, Senator. I would start that on what you concluded with. Without a doubt, there's a massive and chronic underreporting problem with regards to all hate crimes in our country. The highest on record was last year with the 11,000 plus. Based on the Bureau of Justice statistics at the Department of Justice, the estimate is that we capture about 1% of actual hate crimes that occur. So even though we went through and pulled the data for the 27 states plus the District of Columbia and have already arrived at higher numbers than the year is not complete, higher numbers than we saw the year prior, I would suggest that those are dramatically underreported. And you represent, as you said, a state of a wonderful, diverse state that actually one of the top 10 states in the country in terms of Arab Americans who live in your state there are also different barriers that show up for reporting that I think we have to address. Specific communities sometimes have concerns that are related to law enforcement, the relationship with it, that may be a barrier. The issue of training of law enforcement is also critical. My fellow witness gave an example of someone being targeted and the idea that Israeli is the reason they weren't charged with a hate crime. That's, to me, strikes me as a deeply problematic training problem. If you Israeli's national origin, if a person was targeted because of their national origin, that's a hate crime and should be treated as such. In terms of the post-October 7th situation, as our data has sort of demonstrated, is that we are seeing, without a doubt, an increase for both communities. And it continues to be one where, frankly, the challenge has been that we're not having the conversation about the hate crimes. We're having conversations about speech and how do you define this, how do you do that, when the reality is we're already seeing a dramatic increase, and students are being targeted. The FBI released a report that looked at the increase in hate crimes on college campuses recently, and it's one we ought to pay attention to. It's just needing to keep the focus on the hate crime issue.
I just thank you, appreciate it. I want to get some other answers, but I also would add, as I was specifically focused on some of the religious institutions and what we're seeing, we have this program bipartisan basis that we put forward for these security grants for religious institutions that I know in my state, $5 million alone, especially after some of the threats that we've seen that I think have been helpful. And I hope that we will continue to fund this in this budget coming at the end of the year. One thing that we haven't talked about, Rabbi, and I appreciate your words on the laws and what we need to do, I truly do, is just online and what's been going on there. A number of us on this committee have focused on these issues with putting some rules of the road in place on tech. Not going to go into that right now, but examples of how people have become arguably radicalized by what they've seen on the internet. Attacks against the Jewish community in Colleyville, Texas, Black community at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, Hispanic community in the Walmart at El Paso, LGBTQ community in Colorado Springs. So you could just go through all of it. And do you believe that's been part of this, and how would you fix it? Because you have 1 minute, you know. I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Absolutely, it's an absolutely appalling and terrible problem. In the weeks after October 7th, for instance, the phrase "Hitler was right" was trending on Twitter, which is an incredible thing. Unfortunately, I think the best option here is education, and our kids aren't getting it. So, for example, in the first month after October 7th, I was dumbfounded, and I said, would these people online have actually supported al-Qaeda? And then a month later, it turns out they would. And guess whose letter was trending? Bin Laden. We need better education about what they're posting, and it's not going to start online. It has to start way before that. It has to start in K through 12 at the university level before they get online.
Okay. Thank you very much. Did you want to add anything, Mr. Stern?
Yeah, to that I would add that I think that there's a lack of focus on the flip side of the dangers of social media. How to use it more effectively against hate is something that I think should concern this committee and it should support. There's on campus, for example, there's an AI program that someone named Simon Cullen, who's a professor at Carnegie Mellon, developed called Sway. And it encourages students and anybody who has different points of view, whether it's abortion, Israel-Palestine, to moderate it. And it basically flags ad hominem attacks, it flags things that are hateful and says, would you want to rephrase it this way? It takes away the eye rolling, it takes away the anger and the steam. And it's sort of like John Stuart Mill, on AI. And I think things like that will help in this process too.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn.
Rabbi, when we requested this hearing, we asked to focus on anti-Semitism. But I just want to ask you if, in fact, anti-Semitic conduct and behavior is tolerated on college campuses or in our society in general, does that make it more likely that other religious or ethnic groups will also be treated in a similar abusive manner?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Absolutely. Again, Jews are often called the canary in the coal mine of intolerance. What starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And it hasn't taken long already for the public cries from death to the Jews to become death to America and burning flags on our campuses as well.
So if this sort of behavior is tolerated, it's a threat to all minority groups.
It's a threat to our entire democracy, Senator.
Well, I want to talk specifically about the problems that some of the university presidents had in condemning anti-Semitism and enforcing their own rules against demonstrations on campus and the like. Harvard, University of California, Berkeley, Columbia, the University of Pennsylvania, NYU, and Carnegie Mellon apparently all had difficulties drawing the line between permissible speech and impermissible conduct. But one university seems to stand out, and I'm proud of the fact the University of Texas, when this happened on campus, that a number of people not even affiliated with the university threatened to occupy the buildings at the campus and ignored officials' continued pleas for restraint to immediately disperse. The university actually enforced its own rules. And is that the difference between what we saw in so many other places, that they simply tolerated this conduct and the University of Texas did not by enforcing its own rules?
In short, yes, Senator. There has been a complete abdication of authority when it comes to the First Amendment, and university presidents and law school deans that unabashedly explain that the First Amendment is hard to understand and they can't possibly enforce its limits don't belong running universities or law schools. The First Amendment is not a free pass to threaten, harass, intimidate, or otherwise violate the rights of others. There are limits to what constitutes speech, and there are rules for when it crosses over into actionable conduct. And if you can see those rules when it applies to racist, sexist, homophobic, misogynistic speech, but not when it comes to anti-Semitic speech, your problem is not with that line, your problem is with anti-Semitism.
So normalizing this sort of anti-Semitism and the behavior that has been tolerated at so many of these universities is a threat to our society as a whole, specifically minorities. But if you see university leadership like that at the University of Texas actually enforcing its rules and taking action, that can help define what the community standards are and help protect all minorities, correct?
Absolutely.
So I was intrigued by what you were discussing in terms of foreign countries contributing significant sums of money to colleges and universities, and perhaps that having some influence on their policies. We have something called the Foreign Agent Registration Act, which Senator Grassley and others of us have been trying to reform, because we know that foreign countries actively hire lobbyists here in Washington, D.C. to lobby members of Congress on legislation without members of Congress's knowledge that they are actually not they're functioning on part of foreign governments and not on behalf of their constituents, the American people. Could you explain a little bit more about the nature of that challenge, and do you support legislation that would tighten the disclosure requirements in particular so that we could know that foreign governments are actually the prime actors and funders of this activity as opposed to some American?
I absolutely support such legislation, and I will tell you that the problem actually goes further. You see, on campuses across the country, I don't know if any of the senators have spent time inside any of these encampments or protests. I have, and if you walk to the center, you'll notice something fascinating, which is that charitably, 20% of the people there know what river and what sea. Most of them are there for the pizza or because they have been genuinely misled into thinking that they are on the right side of history. And that is important because not only do they not know what they're doing, they don't know that they're actually in bed with terrorists. And that's why, again, our group, along with our partners at Greenberg Traurig, Holtzman Vogel, and others, brought the lawsuit against National Students for Justice in Palestine to try and help draw the line. Because maybe if we could expose that, maybe the 80% would walk away from the 20% of extremists, and we'd save 80% of our citizens, of our future congressmen, senators, and presidents. And so it's a deeply problematic issue that sometimes even the unfortunate, useful idiots are not aware of.
Thank you. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses. I think we're all repulsed by the skyrocketing hate crimes that have occurred across the country. Connecticut is no different. There have been a number of very concerning hate crimes against both Muslim Americans and Jewish Americans in Connecticut over the past few years. In fact, we've seen 158 anti-Muslim hate crimes reported in 2022, up from 2021. And according to the Anti-Defamation League, there's been a huge increase in anti-Semitic incidents within Connecticut, specifically since 2020. At the University of Connecticut alone this past year, 76 bias complaints were filed by both Jewish and Muslim students detailing incidents of discrimination and hate speech since the conflict in Gaza began on October 7th, 2023. The numbers reflect only a small part of the problem, because there has also been a failure or a lapse in reporting hate crimes. And I know that our witnesses have called attention to that problem. There is a real need for more robust data in reporting hate crimes, and the reality is that the government statistics really fail to give us a full picture. With your invaluable help, Ms. Berry, we've begun to make progress on this problem since 2021 and the Jabara Hire No Hate Act. I led that effort in the Senate with Senator Moran. Key provisions of that act provide for grant programs, as you know, to incentivize state and local law enforcement agencies to better adopt hate crimes reporting measures that align with best practices. And yet, despite these efforts, we still see insufficient data related to hate crimes on campuses, as well as in the community in general. So my question to you, with my thanks for your cooperation, your help on these measures, what can we do to support law enforcement's effort on reporting and build on the work that we started with the No Hate Crime Act?
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal, for the incredible work that you and your staff did on securing passage of the COVID-19 and Jabara Hire No Hate Act. As you said, it made a significant improvement. 3 years later, we are seeing additional community-based grants being issued by the Department of Justice that are attempting to address the problem of underreporting. Grants that are going to law enforcement agencies, 100,000 or more. Have you reported hate crimes? Have you not? It's the issue of addressing the affirmative zero. It's hard to believe the number of municipalities and states in our country where they report that not a single hate crime has occurred. So all of that, I think, has been tremendous progress. But you are correct in noting we're nowhere near where we need to be. And I think one of the most important things that we can do, and this is actually a change since we originally did the Jabara Hire No Hate Act to where we are now, is that there's an increase in supporting the measures of getting to mandatory reporting. How do we get to meaningful mandatory reporting? Can we tie it to funds that are already received by local law enforcement so that we can make sure participation in this is possible? The second part of this is we've also had a transition in the way that we report hate crime. And I think I can't stress enough the importance of NIBRS, our new national incident-based reporting system. It really does allow a local agency to go in, having reported a hate crime and perhaps missed it, to then upload it and be able to include it in that. So the importance of that is tremendous. The issue there is, are we getting all of the agencies to participate? And regrettably, we continue to see not enough agencies having fully transitioned to that.
Do any of the other witnesses have any thoughts or perspectives on reporting?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. Yes, I think one challenging aspect of reporting involves the lack of clear definitions. A recent study found, for example, that almost half of adult Americans don't know what the word anti-Semitism means, and those are the people willing to admit that in a survey. So I think the importance of clear definitions would only help with reporting.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Senator,
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think also it needs to, online and other ways to make it so that people understand, not necessarily the road of definitions, but the tools, the support. Meta is one of the people working with us on this Eradicate Hate potential project, the clearinghouse idea, that people can find information from social media if they say, oh, I've been a victim of a hate crime, to get the resources. And I think the easier we make it for people to get the resources they need, the more reporting we'll see.
Thank you. My time has expired. This topic is hugely important and complex and challenging, and I want to thank all of you for being here. Again, my thanks to Ms. Berry in particular for your tremendous work on this issue. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for being here and for participating in this hearing. It's significant that at least until today, no Senate hearing has been held regarding the unprecedented rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses throughout America, especially since the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. It's also significant, I'm very glad that we're holding this hearing, and it's significant that the major overwhelming focus of it is anti-Semitism. But it's odd that the title of the hearing doesn't even reflect that focus. And I think it's unfortunate that we're not having a hearing that is overtly, by name, focused on this specific topic. Because we've got a problem here. We've got these once respected academic institutions of, institutions of higher education that have suddenly found themselves transformed into these seething hotbeds of anti-Semitism. We see universities sitting sometimes idly by, or at least passively by, as Jewish students are threatened, are assaulted, are intimidated from attending class or just accessing facilities at the university, prevented from doing the very things that a college or university student is supposed to do while attending school. Even cases of students being stalked or assaulted simply for wearing symbols associated with their faith have been astoundingly common. And then just yesterday, I read a report of a student just outside the University of Michigan who was approached by a group of men and asked whether the student was Jewish. When the student responded in the affirmative, they beat him up, and he ended up having to go to the hospital. This is really significant, and it's becoming stunningly common. So, look, I understand the First Amendment protects the freedom of speech. It also protects the right of the people peaceably to assemble. It does not protect acts of violence. It does not protect people in their efforts to stop a Jewish student from attending class or approaching his or her dormitory or anything else on a university campus or elsewhere. That's not what the First Amendment is about. Now, one of the things that's so troubling is that there are tools that are ready and available, both within universities and from the standpoint of the federal government, to step in and stop this nonsense. And yet, we've seen little intervention to protect students. The executive branch of the federal government has the authority to enforce Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to protect Jewish students and ensure that universities do the same, to make sure that they have consequences when they don't do it. And yet little action has been taken by the executive branch to make sure that this happens. One of the things that's so galling about this is that students and parents and those who are supporting these students are sending perfectly good money to these universities, specifically so that students can get an education, so that they can attend class, live in the dormitories, go to the bookstore, the library, or anywhere else they need to go. And yet these same universities can't even be bothered to use the vast resources at their disposal on their university, whether it's through their university police or otherwise, to make sure that students aren't inhibited in their ability to walk from one side of the campus to the other, to do something as simple as go to class, or go back to their dorm, or go to their library. Keep in mind, simply as a matter of contract law, before we even get to all of our civil rights protections that we have in law, protections that are not being enforced by this administration, before we even get to that, these people have a basic contractual right and a legitimate expectation that they will be able to access what they paid to be able to access. They didn't pay the university these ridiculously large sums of money simply so that they can wear a shirt with the logo of that university on their shirt. No, they paid for access to an education that they're being denied. In many, countless cases, simply because they are Jewish. Look, this is unacceptable. And it is stunning to me that many of the universities that have been most brazenly unwilling to protect Jewish students are some of the same universities who are charging the most money. We can do better. These universities can do better. And if they don't, they're going to face some very unpleasant consequences, and we will make sure of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming to testify. I would ask that our testifiers speak directly into the mic. I'm having a little trouble hearing you. As we sit here listening to your testimony and the questions being asked, perhaps this is for Mr. Stern and Ms. Berry, is the kind of hate that we're talking about today, whether it's anti-Jewish hate, sexual orientation hate crimes, anti-Hispanic, anti-Black, anti-Muslim, anti-Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, anti-Haitians. Is this kind of hate learned, Mr. Stern?
Yes, but it also is not just the people who are being polluted. Part of the challenge is that as human beings, we're sort of ordained, our brains function to see who's us and who's them. And sometimes the dehumanization and demonization of that becomes problematic in terms of particular groups. It can lead to genocide. It could lead to the types of hate crimes we're seeing. So I think that the more that we focus on that this is a normal human reaction, whether it's on politics too, the better able we're going to be able to handle situations like this. And to just piggyback on one thing that I agree and disagree with my friend, the rabbi, I don't think on the campus we're going to, totally dispel this with discipline. There are certainly places where you need to have, things, the police come in and so forth, but that should be at the last result. The education should be the response to it. And one person I would suggest this committee hear from at some point is Michael Roth, who's Jewish at Wesleyan, who basically said, look, as long as you're not harassing, you're not intimidating, you're going to be okay. You want to pitch a tent, and we're going to bring people in there to have conversations. To me, that's a much better approach in the long term.
I agree with you. And to the extent that this kind of attitude, and yes, that there's human nature aspect to it, that maybe we're never going to be able to eliminate all forms of racism and those kinds of attitude. But it seems to me that education plays a role, and one must start young at teaching against the kind of hatred that we see around us. And as we sit here listening to anti-Jewish hate, it was not very long ago that we were actually watching videos of AAPI communities being attacked and even murdered, which led to the COVID-19 hate crimes legislation, which was a bill that I sponsored, and Senator Blumenthal's No Hate Act was included, which led to much better reporting, albeit it's still the lack of adequate reporting of all manner of hate crimes is recognized, and we can do better. And I'd like to do you agree, Mr. Stern, that we can do better in terms of educating at a much younger age about the impact of hateful rhetoric and to do something more at an early age to address the learning of hate?
Yeah, I think we could do lots of things at the early age. I think also one of the things I put in my written testimony is the idea of bringing people, basically when they're graduating from high school, from different backgrounds together and sending them out to do a project for somebody else. There's some social psychology that suggests that may reduce bigotry. And on the campus itself, let me tell you, at Bard, I had a colleague who saw people spitting out words in a very hostile manner about Zionism, genocide, ethnic cleansing, anti-Semitism. She said, we're in a college. Why don't we teach about it? And she put together a course that helps students not only understand what these terms mean, but why people hear them differently.
So are colleges creating such courses to enhance the dialogue and discussion?
That's the thing that distressed me most over the summer. I saw a lot of reporting on what the new policies are going to be, and I get it, administrations don't want to get things out of control. But I would have loved to have seen, what are the 20 new courses we're offering? What are the new hate studies programs that we're putting together? So when I do workshops with students and faculty and others, and they understand some of the brain science and social psychology about how we get into these heated us versus them buckets, and you intellectually understand that, you're better able to then negotiate these issues.
In the little bit of time that I have left, I agree with you, and I hope that college administrators and leaders are listening to you. And even as we speak, in Springfield, Ohio, the Haitian community there is being targeted, and the town has been targeted by hate-fueled attacks. And bomb threats, et cetera. In your studies, have you seen minority communities being targeted like this? And can we expect that there will be further escalation of hatred against the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, and maybe it will spread to other communities? Can you briefly respond?
Yeah, I am deeply concerned about anybody targeting a whole community, let alone with rumors. But you pick one.
Lies.
Lies, right? And what Mark was saying before too. You go and you stigmatize one entire group because of somebody, somebody that's perceived as part of that group, and bring hate. The problem to me, and this I don't have a solution for, is that hate has always worked in politics. Otherwise, politicians wouldn't use it. And I think that the more that we stand up together and say we're going to call it out, especially when it's from people on our side, the less likely we'll be able to see this type of rhetoric expand.
If I may. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm over my time.
Senator Cruz.
Anti-Semitism is a unique historic form of evil. And over millennia, it has manifested in violence, mass murder, and genocide. October 7th was one of the darkest days in human history when terrorists murdered over 1,200 Israelis and took 251 hostages. Women and girls were raped. It was the single largest mass murder of Jews in a day since the Holocaust. In the wake of October 7th, we have seen anti-Semitism explode across the United States and across the world, but especially on college campuses. As the ADL has illustrated, from 2022 to 2023, the number of anti-Semitic incidents more than doubled in the United States. But college campuses in particular have become vile incubators of hatred of Jews. At Cornell University, in the aftermath of October 7th, one student made vile threats, including statements such as, "If I see a pygmalion Jew, I will stab you and slit your throat. If I see another female Jew, I will drag you away and rape you and throw you off a cliff." A student organization at California State University, Long Beach, circulated a flyer calling for a, quote, day of resistance in celebration of October 7th. You will note on the flyer is an image of a person parachuting with a fan attached, a direct reference to and a glorification of Hamas terrorists that used gliders to descend upon a music festival and murder 260 innocent people and take many more hostages. At Columbia University, the situation got so bad that the Orthodox rabbi on campus, Rabbi L.A. Buechler, had to make this public statement. Columbia University's public safety cannot guarantee Jewish students' safety in the face of extreme anti-Semitism and anarchy. It deeply pains me to say that I would strongly recommend you return home. This was directed to Jewish students as soon as possible and remain home. The rabbi had every reason to be concerned. At Columbia's campus, individuals yelled, "We love Hamas, we're all Hamas, long live Hamas." At the University of Washington, the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors was told that she was called names, she was spit at, she was laughed at. She said she no longer felt safe on campus, and she was told to go back to the gas chambers. This is sick and horrific. At Columbia, when Jewish students were engaged in displaying the American flag and the Israeli flag, another student wearing a mask because these protesters are oh so brave, they almost always cover their face, held up a handwritten sign saying Al-Qassam's next target. Al-Qassam is the military arm of Hamas. According to social media, this particular student is a wealthy student from Georgia. She's not Palestinian, but she has been taught lies and hatred, and she feels perfectly comfortable advocating the murder of her fellow students at Columbia. At MIT, students have reported they feel unsafe to go to class. And the MIT president has said that she would not discipline the students making those threats because if she did, they risk losing their visas and being deported. Throughout all of this, the Biden-Harris administration has been utterly absent. Does anyone doubt if the Klan were on college campuses terrorizing African-American students, threatening African-American students, that we would see the FBI there, that we would see prosecutors there, that we would see federal funding cut off to universities? Of course we would, and we should. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, the Democrats have a problem. I would note, this is occurring in blue states with blue governors because the Democrat Party is terrified of the pro-Hamas wing of their party. In states like Texas and Florida, we don't allow this. At the University of Texas, when violent protesters threatened Jewish students, police officers arrived and arrested them. That's what happened when you enforce the law. Every Republican member of this committee asked the chairman to hold a hearing on anti-Semitism in February. And yet we don't get a hearing on anti-Semitism. We get a hearing generically on hate because this administration, and this is the kind of anger and hate that is encouraged. You're now seeing the hate manifesting right here. Interestingly enough,
Please, the committee will come to order. The senator is recognized to finish his remarks.
So we now have a demonstration of anti-Semitism. We have a demonstration of the hate. Rabbi Goldfeder, let me ask you, has the Biden administration cut off the funding of any of the colleges that have allowed this hate? Have they indicted anyone for funding these violent protests? Have they indicted the people paying for the matching tents? Or have they sat there silently, and have the universities sat there silently while their students are terrified to go to class?
They have not indicted anyone.
They have not indicted anyone. Has any university had their funding cut off for allowing this sort of violent intimidation?
Not a single university.
I can tell you this. Next year,
Senator's
if there
time
is a
has
Republican
expired.
majority on this committee, you will see real leadership. And next year, if there's a Republican administration, you will see people prosecuted for this sort of violence. This is being tolerated with the looking away, the blind eye being turned from this administration and this Department of Justice. And it is utterly disgraceful. And under Title VI, any university that allows this should have their funding cut off.
Senator's time has expired. I would make a note for the record. This hearing is about hate. It includes anti-Semitism as well as hatred towards other people. I would also point out that the previous chair of the committee from the other side of the table didn't hold a single hearing on anti-Semitism or hate crimes. I've held multiple hearings addressing this subject since becoming chair, including a hearing shortly after the January 15th, 2022 synagogue hostage crisis in Colleyville, Texas, which featured testimony from the synagogue's rabbi. Senator Welch.
Thank you. Thank you for holding this hearing. The senator from Texas, I was with you in your indictment of all those horrendous anti-Semitic things that happened. You lost me when it seemed like you veered into a blame game. I think every single one of us here is horrified about hatred and violence towards a person because of what they believe or who they are. Now, in Vermont, we're pretty proud of being a tolerant state, but we have suffered significantly with anti-Semitic activity. It's horrifying. One of the things that's really terrifying to me is that when folks want to go to their synagogue, they have to have police security. You know, when I grew up going to Holy Name Grammar School, we didn't know what that was. We just went to church. And in Vermont, we had 3 young Palestinian men who were home visiting a grandmother for Thanksgiving. They were out walking. They were speaking Arabic. They had on a keffiyeh. They got shot. They got shot. I'm horrified at what has happened to them. I am horrified at the anti-Semitic escalation towards wonderful Vermonters who are Jews and what they have to endure and the insecurity that they feel. So my view here is that let's acknowledge every single one of us is horrified about the expression of hatred towards a Jew, towards a Muslim, towards an Arab, and try to figure out how best we can act. And that does include enforcement. But I have observed that any issue out there that can become a partisan issue often does. My view, that's not a solution. You know, I speak to some Vermonters from the Jewish community, so horrified, as we all are, about what happened, what Hamas did on October 7th. We have a teacher who had a student and was killed on October 7th, and she posted about it and suffered enormous online harassment. But when they had these 3 college boys who were just home for Thanksgiving, and they got shot. I mean, all of us are absolutely horrified by that. And people who commit crimes, particularly hate crimes, they should be punished. But that should be, whether it's on campus, whether it's on the streets of Burlington, whether it's at a synagogue, we all have that obligation. Because that hatred is so corrosive to all of us and to our society. And if we, as a society, can't accept the collective responsibility that we each have for the well-being of one another, then it's not going to work. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the hearing, and I want to thank the witnesses because you're struggling with it day by day. You're trying to help us find a way forward. But it's not going to be just a law that we pass. It's not just an indictment that we prosecute, and those things should be done. But it's going to be much more a collective responsibility that we have as citizens to one another. Now, let me just ask each of you what you think, what advice you have for us.
Thank you so much for that, Senator, because I do think it's the collective responsibility piece, and it's something that Senator Hirano mentioned when she said, "Are people taught this?" Part of what we have to understand is the process of dehumanization is central to people committing a hate crime. I may have a biased view, but moving me to the point of an actual crime, violence, or the targeting of someone or their institution is entirely different. And part of that requires that I don't see this person as human. Right. So when you talk about the cases of the students in Vermont, or we talk about what's been happening on college campuses, part of what we have to understand is labeling them agents of Hamas is part of dehumanizing them. You can disagree or not agree with their speech. What I attempted to say with the ranking member was that he posited a complicated foreign policy question that I don't think belongs at a hate crime hearing. Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran, not only do they have views on Israel, they have views on the great Satan, which is the United States. We can have that conversation in a foreign policy context. I just don't think that's the reason that people are marching, Nazis are marching, saying Jews will not replace us, and they blame the American Jewish community for the Great Replacement theory, therefore they target the tree of life. It's not why Nazis are marching in Disneyland. We have a very real problem, and the center of it is understanding why people hate and what we can do to respond. So the Office of Civil Rights has a budget to respond to the increase in college campus hate that we're seeing. Regrettably, that is not supported in a bipartisan way. So if we intend to actually take this seriously, it's not a conversation about Israel and foreign policy. It's what are we doing to understand that we must improve this response, and that includes no longer dehumanizing Palestinians.
Thank you.
Senator Welch, you may conclude. Thank you very much. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Berry, let me just start with you. You said in response to a question from, I think it was Senator Graham, you praised the protests going on campuses. I just want to make sure I got this right, so you correct me now, as a national organic human rights movement. What did you mean by that?
The mass movement in support of Palestinian human rights is happening on college campuses across the country after students are learning more about the history of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the specific targeting of Palestinian human rights. Yes.
Oh, okay. I just want to be clear about what you're praising and not praising.
Well, praising.
Let's have a look here. So,
yeah.
This long live the Intifada.
Yeah.
Is this an example of the what did you say, national organic human rights movement that you mean? Is this a human rights movement?
I'm not sure that using the term intifada, which literally just means to like shake off or get rid of, is effective, as most Americans don't actually associate it with a human rights issue. So I don't think that's effective. No, Senator?
Wait a minute. You don't think it's effective, but you would agree that this is calling for the destruction of the state of Israel. This is after the
No, Senator.
No, it's not. This isn't calling for the killing of Jews.
I don't know that person, and I don't know that sign. So
you don't know what this means?
I don't think.
You haven't seen this before? Did you see these protests on Rabbi, do you know what this means?
Yes, it's a call for the destruction of the state of Israel and probably the killing of Jews everywhere.
I do not agree with that, Senator.
You don't think that's hate speech right here?
Long live the Intifada can mean different. As I see the problem,
it can mean different things. Wait a minute. These are protests, violent protests on campuses that targeted Jewish students, attacked them personally, prevented them from going to camp, going to class, put them in fear of their safety after the October 7th attacks on the state of Israel that murdered more Jews than at any time since the Holocaust. And you're saying you think that this is an ambiguous message?
I'm saying that any student targeted on campus, a Jewish student.
Will you condemn this right here? Right here. Long live the Intifada. Will you condemn that?
Condemning Jewish students on a campus is being targeted, and the Office of Civil Rights should successfully be given funding.
Will you condemn this as hate speech?
I think that can be hate speech, but I don't think it's automatically hate speech. The problem is that there's nuance I'm trying to introduce to this conversation.
What's the nuance when these people are marching and calling for Jews to be killed?
Sir, because long intifada also means uprising for Palestinians. The way
Oh, so it's ambiguous, so it's hard to say. Well, my gosh. Okay, let's try another one. What about this?
Please, audience will please.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's fine. We know what you think. Right, exactly. I mean, I think you've made it clear, those who were cheering earlier when Senator Cruz was asking about the attempts to destroy and kill Jews. Let's just be clear about what's going on here, because here's what's happening at this hearing. We can't talk about anti-Semitism without also talking about something else. The message that's being sent today at this hearing today is anti-Semitism isn't enough. The attempts to kill Jews on campuses, that's not a conversation worthy of discussion. You've got to add something else to it. So if you want to kill Jews, oh, well, we can't talk about that unless we also talk about 15 other things. And now we have a witness sitting here who will not condemn the attempts on these campuses that are blatantly anti-Semitic tropes, Nazi tropes to try and kill Jews. What about this one? There's only one solution. Is that a national organic human rights movement?
No, sir. I trust that's in reference to Holocaust, and that's
I would think the final solution. Okay, what about this? What about this? Glory to our martyrs.
Again, I don't understand the point of messaging like that. I don't know what that means.
Would you condemn this as anti-Semitic? This was projected here in Washington, D.C. on the campus in front of Jewish students following the October 7th massacre.
I think that that is not appropriate speech at a time.
It was hate speech in the context, don't you think?
Sure, but the point is I would prefer to focus on the issue of hate crime. That's the reason I'm saying
this is a hate crime. When you threaten to kill Jews and destroy the state of Israel, that's hate speech.
No,
that's a hate crime.
Threatening to kill anyone, including Jews, is
let's not pretend that it's ambivalent or ambiguous or we're not sure. How about this one? Free Palestine from the river to the sea.
That's not hate speech, sir.
You don't think that this is a call for the destruction of the state of Israel?
Again, I can speak to what I think, which is amazing because I'd love to talk about what I think, but I really think the focus of our hearing
You don't think that after the October 7th attacks, when this was projected in front of a group of Jewish students right here in the District of Columbia, you don't think that's an attempt to intimidate them and call for the destruction of the state of Israel?
Focusing on hate crime, I would say if that were displayed on a synagogue, then it's a hate crime. If it was displayed on a Hillel, then it's a hate crime. If it's displayed elsewhere, I trust its speech.
Well, and then we wonder why our students are confused. Rabbi, let me just ask you, are you confused about this message?
I'm not confused, and I'll add that even if it was ambiguous and could mean different things to different people, Senator, can you imagine if there was a phrase that also meant kill all the black people? Would we be okay with projecting it because it might also mean something else to someone else?
No, I mean, well said, well said. I'm almost done, Mr. Chairman, but let me just ask, since the witness talked about a national human rights movement, let me just ask about a couple others. University of North Carolina chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine claimed, it is our moral obligation to be in solidarity with the dispossessed, no matter the pathway to liberation they choose to take. This includes violence. Would you condemn that?
I'm sorry, was that for me?
Yes. It is our moral obligation to be in solidarity with the dispossessed, no matter the pathway to liberation they choose to take. This includes violence. You condemn that?
I certainly condemn violence.
Good. You condemn that statement?
I condemn violence. I have no interest in engaging in this back and forth about individual statements of students.
You know what? I do have an interest in it, and here's why. What I just read to you, the United States Senate unanimously condemned this rhetoric. And unless we take a stand now on this rhetoric, on this specific rhetoric out of the mouths of these students that you have called National Organic Human Rights Movement protesters, we are going to send the message that trying to kill Jews on campus, trying to prevent Jews from going to class on campus is just okay. It's just another viewpoint.
Senator,
it's not just another viewpoint. And frankly, what you're trying to do here today, I think, is wrong.
Your time has expired.
Deeply wrong, sir.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rabbi, do you believe there are a substantial number of people at Harvard University who believe in diversity, equity, inclusion, and the right to harass Jews?
I do.
That's a yes?
Yes.
And do you believe those people have acted on their self-anointed right to harass Jews?
Yes.
And has the administration at Harvard University allowed that to happen?
Yes.
Is that true at University of California at Berkeley?
Yes.
How about UCLA?
Yes.
How about NYU?
Yes.
A lot of other universities too. Isn't that the case?
That is correct.
Now, Title VI says that if you receive federal money, you can't harass Jews. Isn't that true?
That is correct.
Has the Biden-Harris administration taken away the money of Harvard?
No.
How about Berkeley?
Nope.
How about UCLA?
No, sir.
How about NYU?
No.
They've just talked, haven't they?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you think this condoned behavior at these universities, this condoned belief at these universities, and let me state it again, they believe in diversity, equity, inclusion, and the right to harass Jews. It's what they believe. What you do is what you believe. Everything else is just cottage cheese. Do you think that is consistent with their mission as universities?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So above and beyond the question of money, it is the morality, the purpose of higher education in America, is it not?
That is correct.
Ms. Barrett, you are the executive director of the Arab American Institute. Is that correct?
Correct, sir.
Okay. And according to your website, you're also, I'm going to quote here, a longtime Democratic Party activist who served as a member of the 2016 Democratic National Convention's Platform Standing Committee, close quote. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You support Hamas, do you not?
Senator, oddly enough, I'm going to say thank you for that question because it demonstrates the purpose of our hearing today in a very effective way.
Let's start first with a yes or no.
Hamas is a foreign terrorist organization that I do not support, but you asking the executive director of the Arab American Institute that question very much puts the focus on the issue of hate in our country.
Well, I got your answer, and I appreciate it. What is the, you support Hezbollah too, don't you?
Again, I find this line of questioning extraordinarily disappointing,
Is that a
Senator.
no?
That
Or
you have Arab American constituents that you represent
is
in your
that
great state.
Yes, ma'am, I understand that, but my time's limited, and I apologize, but is that a yes or a no?
Yes or no question to do I support Hezbollah? The answer is I don't support violence, whether it's Hezbollah, Hamas, or any other entity that invokes it.
You can't
So
bring
no,
yourself
sir.
to say no, can you?
No, I can say no. I can say yes.
But
What
you
I can
haven't.
say is
You just
your
can't
line
make
of
yourself do
questioning.
it. Do you
Senator.
support or oppose Iran and their hatred of Jews?
Again, I'm going to emphasize Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, none of them is going to, this
You
discussion.
can't bring yourself to say no, can
Sir,
you?
I don't support.
It's real simple.
Excuse me, I'm going to,
Ian,
if I may, as a Muslim woman, sir, I'm going to tell you I do not support Iran. But what I will tell you is that this conversation.
I'm running out of time. I'm sorry. You called our decision to cut funding. You called our decision to cut fund. Well, first, what's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency?
It's UNRWA, which is the institution that exists to provide services and aid to the nearly 6 million Palestinian refugees.
And you called our decision to cut funding for them, quote, an incredible moral failure, close quote.
That is absolutely correct. But again, I would suggest that conversation is about foreign policy.
We did that because 9 UNRWA staff members were fired for actually helping Hamas on October 7th. Isn't that the case?
I don't believe that that's correct in terms of...
Let me ask you one more time. You support Hamas, don't you? You
Sir.
support UNRWA and Hamas, don't you?
Sir,
Please.
I think it's exceptionally disappointing that you're looking at an Arab American witness before you and saying you support Hamas.
You know what's disappointing to me?
I do not
You
support
can't
Hamas.
bring yourself
I do
to
not
say
support Hamas
You don't
or
support UNRWA. You don't support Hamas. You don't.
I was very
support
clear in my support for UNRWA.
Hezbollah, and you don't
I
support
oppose-
Iran. You should hide your head in a bag.
Your time has expired. Please, Ms. Berry, I'm going to allow you to respond to any one or all of those questions at this point.
Senator Durbin, thank you very much for holding this hearing and for elevating the issue of hate crime. It's regrettable that as I sit here, have experienced the very issue that we're attempting to deal with today. The introduction of foreign policy is not how we keep Arab Americans or Jewish Americans or Muslim Americans or Black people or Asian Americans, anybody safe. This has been regrettably a real disappointment, but very much an indication of the danger to our democratic institutions that we're in now. And I deeply regret that, and I do hope that my testimony today has been helpful to understanding the need to respond to hate.
Over the weekend, I went to a synagogue in my hometown of Springfield. There was a bar mitzvah for a dear friend of mine. I couldn't help but notice the security guards that were posted for this bar mitzvah. In addition, I went to a meeting where a dear friend of mine, a Jewish friend of mine in Chicago, she's been my friend and worked for me for 40 years, was almost in tears over the anti-Semitism that she has witnessed. She was wearing a Star of David around her neck. And she said, I do that because I won't give up. I won't give up. I thought about it for this hearing, but I also thought about Wadia, a 6-year-old boy. I have a 5-year-old granddaughter. I love her like life itself. I cannot imagine this poor little boy answering the door and losing his life because he's Palestinian. My God, we can't say those things that I've just said in the same sentence without some people saying, oh, you've just chosen sides. I'm not choosing sides here except for the side of, I hope, common decency and democracy. We've got to have this conversation. We've got to do it in a civilized manner. I regret some of the things that were said today at this hearing. But we are a free nation, and that's what happens in a democracy. As sad and as disquieting as it may be, that is part of it. The title of today's hearing was inspired by Dr. King's. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see Senator Blackburn. I was just concluding. Senator, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a feeling you were trying to conclude and didn't realize that I was here, but thank you very much. Rabbi, I want to come to you, if I may. You cited a Gallup poll that found that 60% of American Jews are afraid to share their religious affiliation. And thank you for getting that testimony in early. And that was just astounding to me. And having friends that have felt so impacted after October 7th. And Mr. Chairman, I wish we had had this hearing earlier. This is the first Senate hearing that we have had dealing with anti-Semitism
No, it is not.
since the
No, it is
October
not.
7th
Senator,
attack.
Senator, I'm going to clarify the record once and for all. I gave the date of the hearing that I had on
Okay.
anti-Semitism. You should have been there.
I'm sure I was.
Then you
I
should
make 'em all.
remember.
I make them all. But Rabbi, I want to come to you. I want you to speak for just a moment about how the protests that have carried out on the college campuses and what we've been witnessing, how that not only is affecting the students, but how it is also affecting the Jewish people in your synagogue, in your community. If you'll just drill down on that for a moment for me.
Sure. Thank you, Senator, for that question. The statistics are clear that on-campus incidents lead to county-wide incidents and hate crimes. When you attack a community because of who they are, it sends a message to that entire community. In 2023, our synagogues became fortresses. In 2024, our children still go to school under armed guard because what starts in the universities spills out into the streets, and when it's left unchecked, unfortunately, a lot of these bad actors see kindness as weakness and as a message that they can do even worse and go even harder.
You know, when you talk about the schools, there are a couple in Tennessee, Vanderbilt and University of Tennessee, that have really retained a policy of institutional neutrality. And I know people have appreciated that. So talk a little bit about why it is important for university leadership to support every student instead of catering to pro-Hamas activists.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to clarify the record. We're not calling them pro-Hamas activists. They're calling themselves pro-Hamas
That's
activists,
right.
and they're handing out Hamas recruitment materials. I brought some that I've already introduced for the record. Happy to share more later. So when people tell you that they're working for Hamas, you should believe them.
Right. Thank you for that. Ms. Berry, I do want to go back to the issue of UNRWA. And I know that you made a comment, pardon me, regarding Congress's decision to prohibit funding for UNRWA. And I supported, pardon me, us eliminating that funding for UNRWA. And I think Congress was right to do that because we were fully aware that some of those UNRWA funds were ending up in the hands of terrorists and UNRWA teachers and educational materials that had called for the murder of the Jews, and yet you called that decision to defund UNRWA, and I will use your quote, an incredible moral failure. And do you really believe that cutting off taxpayer funds from UNRWA when we knew that that money was, much of it was ending up in the hands of terrorists, do you still believe that's a moral failure?
Yes, Senator, unequivocally, and I apologize in that, again, it's another foreign policy question, but I'll take the opportunity to explain our position. The United States, as well as the world, has obligations to the Palestinian people after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. UNRWA is part of that effort, and we support UNRWA through our funding because it supports refugees in multiple camps as well as different services. The part about the particular moral failure is that we cut off aid in the middle of Palestinians actually starving within Gaza. So you had a situation where the heightened need existed, and yet we made a move to cut the funding. And additionally, all the other governments that did that have restored their funding because it's been demonstrated that those charges regrettably, those charges are false. So yeah, we need to be funding UNRWA.
Well, I will tell you that I think the real moral failure is that Jewish students are not safe to walk to and from class here in the United States. I think that that is a travesty. I think anything that we can do to protect them, we should be doing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. As I was saying, the title of today's hearing was inspired by Dr. King's famous letter from the Birmingham jail. Dr. King famously wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. The notion of separating out statements that are made about Palestinians, Arabs, Jews, immigrants, Haitians, doesn't succeed in dealing with the problem directly. When we lose our sense of shared humanity, it becomes, when we lose our sense of shared humanity, it becomes easier to dehumanize our fellow Americans and others and commit horrible acts of violence. I agree with Mr. Stern that hate at its core is about dividing us into groups of us and them. We have to resist that ideology of hate. I hope this hearing has highlighted that to all Americans. Yes, it was boisterous. Yes, it was emotional. Yes, it was democracy. The hearing record will remain open for the week for the submission of materials for the record. With that, the hearing stands adjourned.
I thought it was going to be worse. Only, I was expecting more trolls, bots, more hate speech. I mean, it was really, people had things to say, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. So I'm really, I feel like the chat was less contentious, almost less contentious, Papa. I don't know if that's yeah. So, not as bad as I thought it would be. It was like I really wanted to test myself, test the chat, test the channel, test the Senate, see how this would go down, and it wasn't as bad. I was expecting a certain level of, let's say, sub-sophomoric behavior, but no. I mean, I was proud of you, chat, proud of you. The Senate chamber was probably worse off than us, so not bad. I'm gonna go and hunt down my espresso because that hasn't happened. I've been drinking straight cafe Bustelo cold brew, no creamer, nothing this morning, just to try to, escalate that thrill level. So I look like I'm wearing a raspberry beret. I don't know. Is that some sort of lingo? Is that the new what the Sigma? These kids and their. I appreciate everybody in the chat. Thank you, guys. May come back later today for another hearing on AI. I'm not sure. Tomorrow there's some more stuff. It's going to be in the House, I believe, that I wanted to check out. House of Representatives tomorrow. I believe it was a judiciary hearing. No. Oversight of Homeland Security investigations, and that is the Judiciary Committee. It's a subcommittee hearing on crime and federal government surveillance. The subject matter also, it could get contentious. Let's see. It's going to be a hearing to examine the efforts to indict. It's about investigations into fentanyl, protecting Americans from cyber threats, and then it's going to get into combating child exploitation and human trafficking and forced labor. So I don't think it's not as contentious as much as it's going to be some sensitive subject matter. So that is tomorrow at 10 a.m. Oversight of Homeland Security investigations. Join us. Like, subscribe, hit the bell if you want, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much for joining and joining with me. It's I like the chat. It's what keeps me into it. It's engaging and it's funny when it's heavy and maybe you need a little bit of a pick me up, and sometimes if it's little too lighthearted, it can ground you. I think it's obvious why it's helpful. These hearings can go